Jovan, Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers postgame reaction show. Just got back from Crypto.com Arena, where the Lakers beat the Atlanta Hawks 119-102 to improve to 20-14 on the season. And with the shuffling going on in the West standings, have moved up to 4th in the Western Conference. Right there, we've been talking about it for a couple of weeks, about the possibility of LA ascending all the way up to 4th. If they could take care of some of these games during the stretch, they have done exactly that, and they are now 4th, just past the new year. It's been, I would say, about as well as things could have gone up to this point in the season relatively. So a lot to touch on tonight. We got the overarching takeaway. We got the stat of the night. We got the 3 takeaways of the night. And then we got the Q&A. Before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications so you never miss a video or a live stream. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you comment on it. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, make sure you follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. So I see everybody starting to populate in the chat. What is up, everyone? Hope you are having a great night. Baby Father, hi from PR. What's up, my Boricua brother? So let's get into it. The overarching takeaway for me tonight for the Lakers is this was a good win, especially it coming on the second night of a back-to-back. LA is now 4th in the West, which again, I think based on some of the ups and downs of the season up to this point, you take 4th in the Western Conference, but they're right now the only 3 teams above them are Oklahoma City, Memphis, and Houston, and LA, right there in the thick of the West. And I think that the big thing for me is this group is really starting to forge an identity. And it was a big topic pregame, a big topic postgame. And I think improbably they've become a defensive team and less of an offensive team. And it's almost following, in my opinion, the formula of the 2020 team. And it's not exactly the same group, of course, right? They don't have the JaVale, Dwight centers next to 80, and they don't have the overall two-way talent of like a KCP, Alex Caruso, Kyle Kuzma, Danny Green. Like, I think Dorian Finney-Smith, Max Christie can get close to some of those guys and maybe outplay some of those guys. But overall, like, that was a deeper team with more two-way talent, just better defensively. Really, if you looked at their primary rotation, there wasn't really a defensive weak spot within it. They had a lot of size. Kobe famously said that was like the biggest team he's ever seen. And so it's not it's not the exact same thing, but with flipping D'Lo out and putting DFS in, and then playing bigger lineups with, I was thinking of Cam as like, playing him more at the 2 recently. I think Shake has been a placeholder for Gabe Vincent. Like, you just imagine that once this group is whole, whether they keep the starting lineup or eventually move DFS in for Rui, let's just say that they keep this group. You have 80, LeBron, Rui, Max, and Austin. And then off the bench, you have something like Gabe, Cam, DFS, Vando, and then Jackson or Christian. And that's not even to mention Dalton, who brings an entirely different element with his shooting and the ability to get hot. So the Lakers have really leaned into the defensive side of the ball over their last 11 games. So they're 8-3 over their last 11. And that's been the stretch that they've made up ground in the standings and gone from momentarily outside of the play-in to now being all the way up to 4th, which also just shows how fickle the Western Conference can be, how close these teams are together. But over that stretch of 11 games that they're 8-3, the Lakers are 16th in offensive rating, 5th in defensive rating, and 9th in net rating. And to show how deep the West is, they're actually 6th in net rating in the West over that stretch, 9th overall. So only a couple teams in the East above them. But I think this group is leaning into the defensive side. I thought you saw it tonight with holding Atlanta to only 102 points. They had 14 points in the fourth quarter. And when it mattered most, LA did a really good job of clamping down and having so much size, starting to play bigger outside of some of the recent small ball shifts. Like when they've had a center on the floor, they've tended to have pretty big lineups out there. And I think JJ is starting to trend in the right direction with the rotation and what makes sense, and realizing they probably should be playing as much Rui, DFS, and LeBron in the front court next to AD, next to Jackson as much as possible, and then shifting some of the other guys down and playing more Cam and Dalton at the 2, and just throwing out these big lineups where 4 of the 5 guys are like 6'7" and bigger. So I think the Lakers are trending, I continue to say, in the right direction. I thought this was a good win. There was a couple points where it looked shaky, but they overcame that, and they ended up beating a team that on paper should give them some problems with having a dynamic. And Trae Young, 33-9, like he still had a good game, but a lot of high pick and roll in athletes and guys who could get out in transition and be disruptive defensively. And they had elements of doing that. But this was a much different outcome than the game in Atlanta. That was a barn burner. That was a high scoring game that went to overtime. LA really struggled to defend Atlanta. And tonight, certainly some element of Atlanta, I felt, missed some good shots. Like they had a poor shooting night, and part of that's the Lakers defense. Part of that's just Atlanta having an off night. But regardless, like I thought LA just looked much better defensively, especially in that second half when they really clamped down. Stat of the night for me is plus 17, which was LA's rebounding margin. So LA had 56 rebounds. The Hawks had 39. LA had 17 offensive rebounds for a monster 39.5 offensive rebound percentage. And it wasn't just AD. AD is, of course, the I mean, he almost had almost half of the rebounds. He had 19 for offensive, but Rui had 8. And after a couple of subpar games, I thought this was a pretty good Rui game. He got blown by a couple times on the perimeter, but he had several of those baseline cuts. I thought they really just kind of went back to the basics with him. And he had 8 rebounds, 3 offensive. Austin had 7, 4 offensive, and DFS had 5, 3 offensive. So I thought LA did a really good job of crashing and making Atlanta pay for their swarming defense, for the over rotating, the aggressive style that they play. I thought LA really countered that well, and just generating. They had a slight free throw advantage. They took about 7 more free throws, I believe, than the Hawks, if I'm not mistaken. Let me pull it up. Yeah, so they shot 25, Hawks shot 18. But, I mean, technically the Hawks actually had 12 more shots, and that was in part because of the turnovers. So Atlanta only had 8 turnovers. The Lakers had 18. And that's in the player box score. If you look at the actual team box score, Lakers had 19 turnovers. But it only led to 14 Atlanta points off turnovers. Atlanta had 12. I mean, the Lakers had 12 off of Atlanta's 8. So they're almost neutralized there despite the turnover difference of 11 there. But I thought LA really did a nice job of boxing out, controlling the paint. And you saw, like, when they out rebound teams, they tend to do well. It's just it's a very uncommon occurrence that they have a rebounding margin to this extent. Now let's get into the 3 takeaways, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So takeaway number 1 for me is the first look at the new rotation. So the Cleveland game, technically, I guess you could say, but there was no Jackson and even no Christian Coloco. No Christian Coloco tonight. He was inactive with South Bay, but at least with Jackson back, you got a better idea of what this could look like with Gabe theoretically taking Shake's minutes. And I thought, like, the lineup started to make a little bit more sense. I especially like the configurations with 80 plus the 3 young guys of Austin, Dalton, and Max, like that trio on the perimeter. And then you could put LeBron at the 4, you could put DFS at the 4, you could put Rui at the 4, depending on the opponent, depending on the point of the game. But that is a group that plays fast. And I like the 2-man game with Austin and AD, and then guys who can space the floor and make quick decisions around them. I think they're still kind of figuring out the LeBron lineups. I haven't, tonight, looking at just the plus minus can sometimes tell a story. And 4 of the 5 starters had positive plus minuses. LeBron was the lone one who didn't at just +4. And I think that's because looking at some of the bench guys he was with, Cam, Jackson, Shake, even Dalton, like some of those lineup configurations didn't work as well. So I think they still have to figure that part out. Dorian continues to be a plus minus darling. He led the bench in plus minus yet again. Didn't lead the team this time, but was a plus 12. Lakers were plus 12 in his 23 minutes. But clearly at this point, JJ is really leaning into the starters plus Dorian. Those were the only 6 players to play above 20 minutes tonight. Otherwise, it was 13 for Cam, 11 for Jackson, 13 for Shake, 15 for Dalton. So we went with a 10-man rotation tonight, and then 2 for Bronny once the game was decided. But I mean, my only real thoughts are, I guess, like Gabe plugs in for Shake. I think Shake had some nice passes and he had 4 assists, but I think it has looked a bit lost out there offensively, and that's fine. It's game number 3 for him, and new system, backup guard, like that's to be expected. But I think that the starting lineup, like I'm probably leaning toward Dorian starting. I think there's a natural way to, I mean, you could get the same result technically if Dorian's in and you bring in Rui for LeBron, and then you kind of go to that lineup. Whereas if you just sub in Dorian for LeBron, you get to that lineup either way, right? At the midway point of the first. But I'm leading toward Dorian. Like I said, that was part of my instant reaction to the trade. I've been saying that since then. I still think that probably makes the most sense longer term, and having Rui come off the bench, give them some pop, and then maybe you can get some more Rui LeBron bench units together rather than Dorian LeBron bench units, because I actually kind of like that look of them almost overwhelming second units with their offense and their physicality, whereas right now it seems like you're seeing more LeBron Dorian second units, and I don't think those are maybe as dominant or don't have as high of upside. Like I like Rui against bench guys because I think a lot of bench guys are going to struggle to match up with him. So I think the rotation is still in flux, and there was some different things. Like we saw less Dalton in the second half after he had a pretty good first half, scored 11 points, and then I thought wasn't as involved, and then JJ went away from him. Cam I thought had got some run in the fourth quarter, but it continues to kind of find himself in crunch time minutes, which I don't really understand. But he hit a 3 early on, and he continues to play solid defense. I just think Atlanta was hiding Trae Young on him and was not concerned with him whatsoever. So I think there's a limitation there. But I think it's easy to see Vando taking the Cam minutes and Gabe taking the Shake minutes, and them going with a 9.5 10-man rotation, and this group making sense. And then of course potentially a trade closer to the deadline, and then see what hole they want to plug. But this was our first real look at a potential rotation, and I thought for the most part it made sense, though I don't love the late first, late third Shake and DFS and Cam group together. I think that's too limited of an offensive group. They continue to kind of put some of these groups together that are just too bad offensively together, and I think they got to mix that up a little bit with Dalton or Rui in there to give them some more juice. Takeaway number 2 is a twofer. It's LeBron passes MJ for the most 30-point games of all time, and this is his best offensive stretch of the season. So LeBron has scored 30-plus points in 4 of the previous 6 games, and that's the only stretch he's had like that this season. Over those 6 games, he's averaging 30 points a game and 8.8 assists per game and only 2.4 turnovers. So I want to give LeBron credit. Like, I've been critical of the turnovers. Many people have been critical of the turnovers, but he's taking care of the ball more recently. That 8.8 to 2.4 ratio is an elite assist to turnover ratio. And then he's just shooting the heck out of the ball right now. 59% from the floor, 55.2% on threes, and 88.9% from the free throw line. So he's even making his free throws, which has been his Achilles heel basically his whole career, being like a low to mid 70s type free throw shooter. So this is just the best stretch from LeBron offensively we've seen. It has come, I guess, technically against a little bit of a weaker defensive group. Though Atlanta, I think on paper, has plenty of wing guys to throw at him, like Portland, Sacramento. Golden State's a matchup he always kills. But Detroit has a lot of athleticism, wing defense. Cleveland, of course, is the best team in the NBA right now. So, there's been some tougher games in there, some easier games. But I think that the bigger picture point is like LeBron is just, he's come back and looked great from that break. And at first, I thought it was more so the defensive end, but they've put him back more in that point guard playmaking role, similar to him and Austin next to each other and co-piloting the offense. And then I just think he's taking care of the ball. He's shooting well. He's making good decisions. I think he's shooting confidently. Still not getting to the free throw line. That's not his fault. He could It feels like AD, Austin, and Max, anytime those 3 guys generate any contact, they get the whistle and they go to the free throw line, or not anytime, but like 7 times out of 10, right? LeBron, it's like 3 out of 10. 2 out of, I just don't understand why LeBron gets the whistle he does, despite being who he is and having his status. But regardless of that, I just think he's playing great right now, especially on the offensive end, but he has been more engaged, I think, night to night defensively, and passing MJ for most 30-point games of all time. Like, he did it on a fadeaway in the quarter right in front of the Hawks bench. And AD joked after the game that it took him, because AD, of course, is a Chicago native. He joked that it took LeBron 7 more seasons or something like that. But he was saying it in jest. But regardless of how much longer it took LeBron, just this dude's longevity, he's had this scoring load while also being basically a full-time point guard or near full-time point guard for 20 years. Like, scoring has never been the part of his game that people have talked about. It's been the athleticism, it's been the all-around utility, it's been the passing, the vision, the basketball IQ. Scoring is always kind of like an afterthought with LeBron, but he's the all-time leading scorer. He's now has the most 30-point games in NBA history, and I think it's just another accolade and an achievement for him that it feels like every game he's setting a new record, and it's just bonkers. And this dude's 40, year 22, still doing all this stuff. So I think LeBron is in a really good rhythm right now. And I think that's been, like, tonight, he hit several big shots in the fourth, continues to control the game, targeting Trae Young or Matthews, or like he just targets whoever he wants. And I mean, there's a reason why he has all these records, right? So that to me, like, that's a big thing, that if he can continue this, I don't know how long he can continue this, just from a workload perspective and an efficiency perspective. You'd assume it's going to dip at some point, but for now, Lakers need to ride this. And I think he's just playing at a really, really high level. And takeaway number 3 for me is, I thought we saw some signs of growth from Austin in this one. So a very slow start for Austin. He opens the game 2 for 9. At one point had 4 points and 4 assists. There was also another point, because I'm periodically checking the box score throughout the game, another point where he had 3 assists and 3 turnovers, which you never want to have an equal assist to turnover ratio. And he still finished the game with an equal assist to turnover ratio. Overall, finished with 20 points, 6 of 18 shooting, not efficient, obviously, 3 for 7 from deep, 5 for 6 from the free throw line. But he had 7 rebounds, including 4 offensive rebounds. I thought did a really good job of attacking around the free throw line grabbing some of those long rebounds, kind of loose balls around the free throw line, top of the 3-point arc. 6 assists, did have 6 turnovers. And as an aside, Dyson Daniels is a one-man defense like unto himself. Like he's a beast. He's a monster defensively. He had 5 steals tonight. And similar to the way that teams have at times, especially like Golden State, have countered AD by really avoiding the paint or trying to target him in a way to bring him out of the paint and then to try and attack the paint with him out of there. It was like the Lakers started to almost go away from Austin just because Dyson Daniels was like, with handoffs, with dribbles. It wasn't even just Austin. It was like if he passed the ball to AD, all of a sudden AD pivots and Dyson Daniels is swiping and poking the ball loose or whatever. So it was like Dyson Daniels is that dude's one of the best defenders in the NBA, like point blank period. So I thought he did a really good job disrupting Austin and making him uncomfortable. But after I would say a pretty bad first half for Austin, especially by his recent standards. Second half, first possession, hits a 3, then starts to get downhill, get to the free throw line. And I thought there's time, like there'd be previous games where it might have compounded and he would have had a quiet second half, but I thought he did a really good job of responding in the second half and meeting force with force and just being more aggressive and getting downhill. And still, again, 6 turnovers, breaks his double-digit assist streak. 6 assists breaks his double-digit assist streak. 6 turnovers is far too many. And this continues to be a trend with him where he does struggle against bigger, more athletic perimeter teams. Now, that's less of a concern as the number 3 guy than if he's the number 1 or 2. If he somehow becomes the number 4 after the trade deadline, then it's even less of a concern. But I think Austin, he also led the team in plus minus at +8. The Lakers were +18 in his 39 minutes. So I think despite some of these struggles, like the offense continues to look better with him on the floor. JJ's talked about that you kind of got to live with some of the turnovers with Austin, just with the way that he plays, the pace that he plays with, and him still continuing to grow as a lead playmaker, as a lead ball handler. And I thought this was certainly the worst game that he's played of this recent stretch, but it still, to me, it kind of highlighted the floor with Austin. Like this to me is kind of his floor right now of he's still going to compete on the defensive end. He's still going to get to the free throw line. He's still going to make threes operate as a spot up guy. And then I think the rebounds, like he's always finding ways to contribute and step up if he's not scoring well or taking care of the ball well. So I still think, again, like not a great night for him, not even necessarily a good night, but we're saying that with him going 27 and 6 and hitting 3 threes, like he's still found ways to contribute. And I think overall we're starting to see, like, he's always kind of been a high floor player where he gives you a higher baseline than maybe some of the other role players on the team. But I think that's even getting higher now. And you could almost pencil him in again for like 18 to 20, no matter the circumstances of the evening. But pretty sure that is it for me for everything from the game. So let's get into the Q&A. Just as a heads up, I'm going to be going an hour tonight, similar to last night. So I kept to it. I went like an hour 3, an hour 4. So gonna try and hold myself to that once again. First question, super chat from Gabriel. Would you swap DK for Keon Ellis? I like DK, but he's a bit one-dimensional. I don't think he'll ever be a starter on a contender because of his defense. I would not. I understand why you're posing this question. I think if you want to be real about it, like I think you could make a case that a Keon Ellis type, I don't know if Keon Ellis is good enough for this example, but like that type of player could help the Lakers win now more than Dalton potentially could. But I think the Lakers are looking at Dalton as a longer term piece. And from a longer term piece perspective, you might be right with the defense. Like we have to see how his defense progresses. And I think, though he is on the older side, obviously at 23 already, I think there's still an element of rookies take some time to adjust to NBA offenses in terms of defending them. And Dalton has had a red target on his chest all season, and teams have specifically targeted him. And that makes it even tougher. Once you, like, when you come in with a reputation of being a bad defender, you're going to have that target on your back, and, or I guess technically on your chest, as I just said. And teams are going to point, like, do what LeBron loves to do. And it's like, where's the weakest defender on the court? Let me target that guy. Teams have done that to Dalton, or sometimes even like decoy actions where they kind of run one thing and then go into the other thing. And it's really to get a guy isolated against him or with a step on him and then attacking the Lakers defense. So I think longer term, I would take Dalton over Keon Ellis. And I still think, I know he's had a rough month and the defense has been bad, and there's been times it's been really bad, but I'm not quite at the point of giving up on Dalton. I think you have to get a higher upside player to do that. Now, again, I think in a vacuum, you could argue that a 3-and-D type guard or just another, a more playoff ready player could help the Lakers more than Dalton potentially. But I think they're looking at him more as a longer term piece. Now, you could maybe disagree with that and say, where I'm getting at with Dalton is I'm more open to him potentially being included in a bigger trade. Like, let's say the Lakers actually have a chance for De'Aaron Fox. I would strongly consider, if not be willing to put Dalton in. And depending on who else is available, I would consider Dalton, just because at this point it seems like he's not a rotation lock and seems to be more on the fringes of the rotation, though the upside is clear. Like when he's making, like even tonight, I thought he had 3 threes, and he had that one pull up 3 on Matthews and hit a couple corner threes off kick out passes. And like when he's making threes, it really helps the offense. It's just he's not been shooting the ball consistently well, and then he's not bringing enough. The rebounding has slipped a bit. The defense got to a point where it wasn't like horrible, and then I think it's kind of gotten back to that point. So I'm more open to like trading him in general, I guess I would say. But I think like this specific example and just trading him for like, because Keon Ellis to me is more of like, maybe he's a third guard at some point in his career, but to me he's probably more of a fourth guard, and I think Dalton's upside is just higher than that. Now this year maybe not, but longer term, yes. BLC, thank you for the super chat. Happy New Year, Jovan, with a heart emoji. Thank you. Happy New Year to you too. What other moves do you think we need to do now to make us a legit contender? And how far away are we from the level of OKC and Cleveland? Thank you. Well, I would throw Boston in there. So just to be clear, I think that's like the top 3 on their own tier, or maybe even I would probably put a healthy Boston on its own tier, and then OKC and Cleveland on like a second tier. But regardless, they're all kind of in that general mix, and it's tough because you talk to different people and you get different answers as to backup big man, another wing, another ball handler, playmaker. I think they probably need another bench playmaker, and so, or just another playmaker in general. Like right now, the offense is really concentrated around LeBron and Austin. And I just think if even tonight, like some of the stretches where Austin was struggling, I thought the offense really struggled. And I don't think you can be as dependent. Like they become really dependent. And that also ties back to the 2020 comparison I made earlier, where it's a little bit different because I think Austin has a higher usage and like higher offensive role than anyone else did on that 2020 team. But it still is kind of a similar thing of it's LeBron, it's AD, it's Austin, and then everyone else is sort of a random grab bag of like how many shots they're going to get, how many points they're going to score. You don't really have that consistent, just that consistency offensively right now from anyone. Like I think Max has been trending upward. Rui will have big games. Dalton has had some bigger games recently, but night to night, you just don't really know what you're getting offensively from the rest of this group. And I think having another like scorer playmaker type could help. Now, the challenge is now that they've traded D'Lo, and I've made this point before, like it probably would have been, I think from a roster construction perspective, it probably would have been easier to do if you could have done Gabe and like Christian Wood for DFS. That probably makes a bigger trade a little bit easier. But now because your salary's Rui at 17, and then two guys that don't have a lot of value, if really any, in Gabe and Vando at 11-ish million, it just gets hard to kind of put the contracts together to get a higher kind of shot creator scored type. So certainly De'Aaron Fox and Brandon Ingram are a little bit easier because they're in the mid 30s. A guy like Zach LaVine in the 40s, Jimmy Butler in the 40s. Those guys are probably a bit too high for the Lakers. But I think if they could, I would say if there was a way to get a better backup big, the name I'll always throw out is Walker Kessler, but a Robert Williams, a Walker Kessler, maybe on a lower level like a Nick Richards. If you could do one of those type deals, upgrade the backup 5 spot, and ideally a big who could play next to 80 for stretches, at least one shift per half, and then also get another scorer player, playmaker that could be a wing, but could also be a guard. I think that balances out the rotation a little bit. And if it costs you Gabe and Vando, it costs you Gabe and Vando, and maybe it costs you Rui. It just depends on the price of that player. But I think those two types of moves put the Lakers closer. I don't know if they're, to be quite honest, I don't know if there is a move that puts them on that OKC, Boston, Cleveland level, but I think there's a move or two that could put them, probably one, but because I don't know if they're going to make another 2 trades. We'll see. Probably a move or two that could put them on like that tier 3 where they're like right there. And if one of those teams suffers an injury, it's of note. Like the top 3 teams in the league, only one of them is in the West in OKC. So that potentially sets the Lakers up to get to the conference finals at least. And then once you're in the conference finals, they have played OKC well in recent seasons. They have a size advantage. Now we've yet to see Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein play together, so that we don't know what that looks like against the Lakers yet. But you at least have a chance. And that's, I think, all you want to do is give LeBron and AD a chance, get them a good supporting cast, get them healthy, and put them in the playoffs and see what happens. Like that's all you can realistically ask for. And I think LA's, again, trying to get the right direction with the supporting cast and what this group looks like. I think with a couple of tweaks, they could be right there where they're at least a contender, at least a conference finals threat. And once you're there, anything could happen, as we've seen. So I'm not quite sure that there is a move that gets them to that like top no-brainer contender or like on the level of some of these teams. But I think there are moves that get them right under that. And even if they're right under that, I think that's better than being where they're currently at, in my opinion. Wreck Your World, thank you for the super chat. I don't see a question, so if you have one, drop it in the chat. And then super chat from Jackson, Jovan, are the Vit Krejci rumors? I think that's how, I don't even know how to say his name, to be honest. Rumors to the Lakers true. Based on my response, I've not heard him attached to the Lakers. Doesn't mean it's not true, but I have not heard him attached to the Lakers. Loading, sending love, Jovan. Sending love right back to you. Kevin Cambridge, Jovan, have you heard the new Drake freestyle yet? Yes, I have. Interesting. Certainly seems to be some shots at some people, potentially, particularly a player with the Lakers, but it's interesting. J.R. Majano, Tumani Kamara as a target, thoughts? I love him as a target. I've heard the price is high. I don't know how high. I don't know if it's a pick. I don't know if it's more than that, but I think it would be at least a pick, but I really like Kamara. He's someone that I think would be a really good fit. L.A. Jovan, would you do 1 first-round pick plus DK plus Gabe for Herb Jones and 1 first-round pick plus 2027 first-round protection removal for Kessler? Do you think those teams would do it? I think New Orleans would want more. I also think one complicating factor here is the history with the Lakers and the Pelicans and just the AD trade and some of that stuff. Like, I think Pelicans are lower on the list of teams that would want to trade with the Lakers, to be quite honest. First round pick at 2027, first protection removal for Kessler, I would do that. I think Utah would strongly consider that. I don't think New Orleans would. I think they'd want more. And just to quickly touch on this, because I didn't really... The Kevin Cambridge, Drake, I like the Drake freestyle. I thought it was good. But yeah, I mean, it seemed to be some shots at LeBron based on their falling out during the Kendrick beef. Hig, I'm keeping Jared Vanderbilt. People don't understand that he is an elite lockdown defender. It's a good point. Now I will counter that with the recent injury history and the offensive limitations. And I think DFS is kind of Vando insurance. Like, I think peak Vando is a better defender and he's younger and more athletic, but he's also bigger and longer. But I think we saw during the conference finals run, he progressively played fewer minutes in each series. If you go look at game 1 and then the final game in game 6, game 4, in each of the series, he played fewer minutes. Now, you could try and flip that and say that's on Darvin or that coaching staff or whatever, but I think that was partly intentional with how teams were defending him and able to. Now, they did make some progress last year with his offensive role and how they used him, and we'll see if JJ could do the same. But I think there's also an element of just like he has 3 more years, and if there is a way to flip that for a player that's a little bit more reliable, a little better offensively, and maybe has a better contract situation, I think you strongly have to consider that. Liberty, Jovan, who is the best realistic backup point guard we can get. People love throwing out Trey Mann in the chat. I've not heard him linked to the Lakers, but that's an interesting one. I think Lonzo is probably the best backup point guard, and he's even technically, I guess, like a small wing / primary ball handler. But I would say Lonzo, in my opinion, is the best, unless you think Markelle Fultz or Dennis Smith Jr. is better, which I don't. So I would say Lonzo. Dark Galaxy, Jovan, tell Pelinka to go get Sexton and Kessler. I don't know that he would listen to me because I've been banging the DFS drum for a couple years, and I guess he did go out and do that. So I don't know, maybe. But yeah, if I talk to him soon, I will pass that along. J Hoodie, again, I don't think trading Vando is smart. I think it like there's also, we're operating under the assumption that he is going to be back at some point because that's what the Lakers have indicated. But like, if there is another setback or whatever, and it looks like he's just out, like at that point, I think you have to do it, right? Like or if you have the opportunity to, you have to. So I think it kind of comes down to their confidence in him. But I think the flip side is trading Rui, and maybe that's like, ideally Vando could come back soon and the Lakers could get an idea of what this group looks like when healthy with him. And even if Christian doesn't necessarily come back, like I think Vando and Gabe are the 2 guys that are out right now that I think it's important to see what they look like. And then you can make that decision between Rui and Vando. Kane Norris, Jovan, did anyone ask Reaves about the potential injury he suffered at the end of the game? Looked to be in some discomfort. I was not there for Austin's post-game press conference, so I am not sure. I do have a transcript of what was said post-game, so I can pull that up. Give me 1 second. I don't see anything about the injury. So I'm going to assume he's okay. Okay, Wreck Your World, who asked the super chat earlier. My question was, would a better two help us more than a big man? We keep getting burned by Murray and faster guards. Who could we get? I think Bruce Brown is my top guy who I think is realistic. And if you potentially get, I don't know that he's an upgrade over Max defensively in this specific area. I think Max is going to continue to grow with more reps and experience defending those types of guys. And he's done a good job against the De'Aaron Foxes, John Morant's, Cade Cunningham's, etc. But I think adding another guy like Bruce Brown, who's a two-way guy who could do multiple things offensively. He could shoot, pass, dribble, screen, good cutter, plays bigger than his size, sneaky offensive rebounder, then defensively can defend at least 1 through 3. And I think even like I like that the Lakers have guys in DFS, Max, even Rui, depending on the matchup, Cam, guys who can defend up sometimes and get into the legs of bigger guys and just like be physical and compete with them. That's something that they haven't really had with some of their perimeter guys for years. And even Austin does that, but he's a little bit too small. But like I think Max especially does a really good job of fronting guys, getting into their legs, and like we saw it with Wemby, him really be disruptive on some of those entry passes in the post. So I think Bruce Brown is probably the best of those guys in general, but also for like specifically what you're talking about. Because let's throw in Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson or Zach LaVine, like those guys are not necessarily helping. Like I guess Sexton is the best defensively of that group, but I think he's a little bit overrated defensively. So I don't know of a great option out there right now in terms of a defensive two, but I agree. Like I think the one point I've been making, and I'll keep it to like under 20 seconds, is just I think JJ clearly even tonight only played Jackson 11 minutes with 80 back. And I think there's a bit of a limitation there of one healthy, how much a center would play. I think Walker Kessler is maybe an exception, maybe Robert Williams, but then like once we get to the Jonas Valanciunas, even Jakob Poeltl, like some of I just don't know how much JJ would actually trust those guys and play them. So if the Lakers are looking to get a backup center to play 15 minutes a night versus a two guard who could potentially start or play a big role off the bench, that might just be more valuable because it's a bigger part of the rotation, potentially a bigger impact. So that's kind of where I'm at with the whole perimeter versus big man thing. DFS really did not let Hunter get any space. Yeah, I think I didn't really touch on it. So what's funny is that JJ opened his post-game press conference by calling out DFS and saying that he felt he had a horrible first half and that he told him that at halftime, and he felt DFS responded well in the second half. And it was kind of his first time like going at him and being critical of him. And DFS came out and defended really well in the second half. Did have 5 fouls tonight, but he had a couple threes. He had that reverse layup. And as I mentioned, had 3 offensive rebounds, led the bench in plus minus. And even the fouls, I continue to think like that. I mean, that was a bad one on Trey, the one that was his fit that ultimately got him pulled. But outside of that, like he's just a physical dude who's out there like hacking guys and just big handsy and just big annoying. And like I think the Lakers really needed that. And it's not something that shows up in the box score, and it's not, and I know people have been going at DFS's offense and whatever, but I just think that the dude's a winner. He makes winning plays. And again, if you're going to compare like D'Lo and DFS's raw numbers, D'Lo is going to look better. But in terms of who's a guy who can play in a playoff setting and contribute and do the little things that help a team be good, I think it's DFS, right? Like he makes the extra pass. He doesn't take bad shots. And I think he's just a nuisance in there at times where guys, he's just bugging everybody, and that's a good thing to have. And the Lakers didn't have that. Shbugen, thank you for the super chat. Because there's no news, let's get weird. Should the Lakers trade for Zion? Could the Lakers ask for a pick? If so, I will go back to the New Orleans kind of dynamic that I just touched on, where I think it is a little bit of a weird situation, especially if they trade their second franchise big to the Lakers. Now you got to go for the best price available because of I think I know trading for Zion is a big risk, but so should they? I think it depends on the price. And off the top of my head, Zion is making, I think he's in the 30s. I'm going to pull this up quickly because he had the big extension. Okay, so yeah, Zion's at 36.7. So Zion is in that Brandon Ingram, De'Aaron Fox range of like mid 30s. So you can get there with Rui, Gabe, Vando, and minimum guy. Maybe you throw in Dalton or whatever. But you could get there. Now, should they? I like the idea of like how dominant a front court it would be offensively and like dominating the paint with AD, Zion, and LeBron. I do think there's some spacing issues there. Zion is a limited defender. There's also the matter of his injuries, what type of shape he's in, how motivated he would be, like just also that contract, how it's going to age. And I would be surprised if the Lakers could ask for a pick in that situation, especially with the New Orleans dynamic. I think some team is going to talk themselves into Zion and him being a potential draw, and like especially if it's another small market team that you only get so many shots at a star, and this is like this is a very high upside or high risk, high reward situation where it could work out and he could go back to being peak Zion and be healthy, and it looks like an amazing trade for whatever team trades for him, or it could be he fizzles out, he stays being injured, bad shape, and he kind of becomes a cautionary tale. I think it kind of feel like it's going to go one of the two ways. And if so, basically, I think I would assume there's going to be a team that talks themselves into like giving up a pick or maybe even two for him. So I don't see that the Lakers being able to ask for one back, in my opinion. Nas, Jovan or anyone else, I feel like Koloko is way better than Hayes. I wonder if anyone agrees. I don't think he's way better than Hayes, but I think he's a better defender than Hayes, and he might fit better for what this group needs. Because last game against Portland, Jackson got in foul trouble early, and I think kind of regressed from a rim protection perspective. I thought Koloko outplayed him, and I think that he's had some flashes where I do wonder. Kane Carter, Jovan, how's it been being another fellow Drake fan as a Angelino the past year? It has been rough. I'm not going to lie. It has been rough, but it's the path I chose. Okay, I'm catching up. Glenn S. Jovan, my favorite Lakers podcast. Thank you. I appreciate you. Do you feel the Lakers' energy changed since the DFS trade? They feel tougher as a team, more resilient on D. Yeah, JJ talked about this pregame of he just feels like the group is really connected right now. That Dorian has come in and brought a certain energy and toughness, and like he's already seen it rub off on the group. And you never know how much of that is like coach speak and just a guy, a coach hyping up a player or whatnot. But I have gotten that sense of, he's fit in, even being in the locker room pregame yesterday, seeing him talking with I think it was Cam and Jackson and Bronny, and might have been one more player in there, but like it already feels like he's a part of the team in that sense, and not like the new guy who's like just fitting in. So I think certainly like that, and that's there's an amplifying effect to it, right? And I think just adding in another big wing who plays defense and does the little stuff like that for a group that was already starting to trend that way, he just kind of amplifying the way that they've been playing in their recent identity. So I think he's fitting great, and I don't want to chalk it up to solely the DFS trade, but I think they've been playing better recently. When a team is playing better, when you're winning, the vibes are always better. Like you never hear of a team meeting when a team is playing bad. You never hear of one of these chemistry stories when things are going great. It's always when things are not going great. So there's always kind of that chicken or the egg element with energy and rhythm and momentum. It's sort of like when you're winning, things are better. When you're losing, things are worse. It's kind of that simple. But I will say, like, I have noticed a bit of a difference there, and I think he's fit in seamlessly. Okay, catching up here. I see that there's a couple super chats that Brian Rhymes, thank you for the super chat. Yo, what's up, Jovan? Huge fan of the show, day one. I appreciate you. If you have a question, let me know. If you're just shouting that out, I really appreciate you. Shout out to all the day ones in the chat. We are a little less than 2 months coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the channel, of the show, and I'm really hyped for the next couple months and hitting that 1 year anniversary. Rolla plus, imagine the defensive depth once Vando is back to 100%. Yeah, I mean that's the upside of Vando, and I just think the tricky part, and I made this point. I made this point several times during the season. Like the tricky part compared with right now versus the 2023 trade deadline is the Lakers had dead money, bad contracts that they wanted to get off guys that weren't performing well. Kendrick Nunn, Russ, Papev, and you could send those guys out, and it was almost like no matter what you were getting back, it was going to be positive. Right now, in theory, like they already traded, D'Lo, and regardless of your overall thoughts on Rui, Gabe, or Vando, like when the Lakers built this team, those three guys were all supposed to be a part of it, and relatively big parts of it. Like two of those guys were going to be competing for a starting spot. One of those guys was potentially going to be a closing option. So those three are supposed to be like a big part of the identity and just this team. And even now, I would say like trading what, like they still project to be in the rotation of what this group looks like when healthy, and trading any one of them, like I think you just have to be really careful with who you trade and make sure that the trade makes sense, because there is some risk of like, if it's like a neutral trade or even potentially a trade that backfires on you, you almost look at like the potential counter argument of like not making a move. Now I'm on team, be aggressive, trade at least one of the first, if not both. So I'm not backtracking for that. I'm just saying that they got to be smart and careful with whatever move they make here. Tom, Nets should trade for Zion. Don't bring him to LA. I would like him in Brooklyn. That it's like a lower stakes situation where he can kind of just be himself. I think it could go really south in LA. I mean, we saw it with Russ, right? But I don't think he's going to end up being a Laker. Andres, hey Jovan, love your work. I follow you from Colombia. Shout out to Colombia. Do you see the backcourt with Austin and Max being a top 5 backcourt in about 3 to 5 years when AD and Braun are out? Thanks again. I don't. I think top 5, like if I'd have to really go through the top 5 backcourts in the league. But if we're looking at like, I mean, just to look at some of the top teams in the league, like Cleveland, you got Mitchell and Garland. Boston, you got I guess White and Holiday. There's a lot of good backcourts. I mean, technically, I guess Memphis would be like Bane and Ja, depending on. I know sometimes Bane's a small forward. Long story short, I think like when you're talking top 5 backcourt, especially backcourt, it's typically like 2 all-star level guys or close to all-star level guys. I don't think Austin and Max get to that level. I think Austin can maybe be like a fringe all-star at his peak, but tentatively I'm saying not. And I don't think Max, as of right now, based on what we've seen, could get there. So I would say no, but could they be a top 10 backcourt? A top half of the league backcourt? Top half of the league, yes. Top 10, they could. I think they could be in that conversation. The problem is like the way the game has shifted, it's like there's so many good guards and so many good perimeter players that even saying like, if I was like, they're the 11th best backcourt in the league in 3 years, like that might not sound like high praise, but it could really be high praise with how much perimeter talent there is. So I would say I don't see top 5, to be honest. And that's coming from a guy who I've had both of them on my podcast. I'm high on both of them. You know, I don't think the Lakers should trade either of them, but I don't see top 5. L.A. Jovan, any truth to the talk that the front office is more focused on adding a guard or another wing over a big? I could see it. As I reported, my understanding is that they really want to get a better idea of this group over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and really like let's say 3 weeks, like 3.5 weeks, and go into that final, like, because it's like late January into early February is when things really start picking up, like pick up, like that final 7 to 10 days before the trade deadline, and go into it with an idea of, I think for them in an ideal world, Gabe's healthy, Vando's back, Christian Wood's back. They have the full rotation. They see what that looks like for at least a couple weeks, week and a half, whatever, and they can make an educated decision on, okay, this is what the full rotation looks like. This is who's playing well. This is who isn't. This is who fits our identity. This is who isn't. And this is like the need or two that we need to try and go address on the trade market. Now, I know that in the aftermath of the D'Lo trade, they wanted to evaluate the playmaking and just make sure that it's at the requisite level. I would argue that it probably hasn't been. It has been through just LeBron and and Austin, and sure, throw AD in there, though I think he needs to do a better job of dissecting double teams and spraying the ball out. But like having that third, I don't think they have that third playmaker right now, and I don't think it's Shake. It could be Gabe. I'm a little bit skeptical of that. So that might end up being the need that they see over the next like 3 weeks or so, that it ends up being a guard spot, more so than a big, especially if Christian Wood comes back and looks solid, and you have him, Jackson, and Christian Coloco, like maybe they're just kind of like it's backup center by committee, and let's go get another guard or wing. Jazz_Sing, thank you for the super chat. JHS and 2 firsts for Kessler, and then Dalton and 2 seconds for Alexander Walker. I would not give up 2 firsts for Kessler. I don't think it would require 2 firsts for Kessler. I think you would get him for 2 firsts, but I think if you hold out and are patient, you can get him for a first plus something else. But in general, the framework of JHS plus a first and something else for Kessler, I'm on board with. DK and 2 seconds for Alexander Walker, I would do that. I don't know that Minnesota would do that. I still think Minnesota is in, like, if we're talking about who could help you win now, it's Alexander Walker. I think Minnesota is both looking at the future and the present, but they want to, like, he was a key bench guy for them. And I think you could argue could be taking on potentially a bigger role, like both him and DiVincenzo as the season progresses, with Conley being on the back nine of his career and them needing a little bit more juice overall. So I don't think Minnesota would do that. Maybe they would. But I think from like a win now perspective, I think you're taking a step back. Like maybe if it gets to the point where they just kind of realize the season is shot and they're not going to be able to save it. And if they're like the 11th seed around the trade deadline, maybe they're just like, screw it, let's do a talent grab and like get a guy like Dalton, who maybe longer term is better than Alexander Walker. But I think for them, that would be a competitive step back. And like from a value perspective, you could obviously argue that Dalton has like more value in a vacuum than Alexander Walker. But from like when you're trying to win, taking a potential step back is like not even a consideration, right? So that's where I feel like they probably wouldn't do that. Brian Rhymes, feel like Walker Kessler is the missing piece the Lakers need, with Vando coming back in DFS edition. Defensive ceiling looks nasty. Yeah, I mean, if you just take out JHS and put in Walker Kessler, it's like good. Like you could have a second unit of Walker Kessler, Vando, and DFS that it's like good luck scoring. And obviously, you stagger LeBron and AD, and LeBron would probably be in there, but you get my point of like the second unit front line just gets like insane. Super chat from O to the We. Any chance we go after Jimmy Butler? I know it could be a handful to deal with, but could Miami let him go for cheaper due to the drama going on? There's always a chance. I think the biggest hurdle is salary matching with Jimmy. I think the other thing, like he's 35, he has an injury history. He wants to get paid. Anyone trading for him is you don't have to pay him, but I think there's going to be an assumption that there's some prior conversation as to like what his future is with the group. Maybe they just trade him and it's a situation where he's a rental for a few months, but then do you want to give up whatever the price is going to be? I think certainly there's a chance he goes cheaper than you would expect for a guy with his pedigree and with his status. But I think, again, trading D'Lo makes it a little bit trickier to go after a bigger fish. And Jimmy, I want to say, is making in like the high 40s, like 48, 49, if I'm not mistaken. And that's just a lot of money to get to. You almost have to put Austin in it. And then at that point, it's Jimmy, LeBron, AD, and not much else. It's like what else? Like I think depth is the one issue with the Lakers going after a star is you almost have to give up so much that the remaining depth, like already tonight, as I said, JJ only trusted 6 guys and played 6 guys over 20 minutes. And like the other guys, he was a little bit skittish with. And like you're getting to the point where it's almost tough to field a lineup of like 5 guys that you trust, or even, let's just say 5, but like 7, 8, I made the comparison last night, but you're the Phoenix Suns basically. And I would argue potentially even with worse depth. So that's the tricky part with trading for Jimmy. I am a bit over the hour, so I'm going to do, I got 3 more super chats here, then I'm going to wrap. IS, thoughts on JJ compared to the rest of the league's coaches? I think JJ has been solid. I will say, like, I think that there's certainly some things you could point to in terms of the offensive organization being very up and down, the switching at times being problematic, and I think some of the I would say more so say earlier rotation stuff took him a bit to figure out some of the best combinations and like really the hierarchy of the team. But I think he's had really good buy-in from the group for most of the season. There was that weird stretch with the Minnesota and Miami games where it looked like they were basically quitting on him. And outside of that, he really, like, he was about to lose the locker room, but he didn't, and he found a way to rally the group. And I think he's faced, like, even the whole Charles Barkley thing, that was, and fun fact, I guess, like I inadvertently started that because I asked JJ about the TV ratings. Then he went off on, we don't celebrate the game. And every time you turn on the TV, it's you're being told how much the game sucks and how bad the players are and how much better it used to be. And that was, I guess, perceived as a shot at Inside the NBA and TNT because they're often the most critical. And then Charles Barkley responds with his thing that I asked JJ about his response, and he says, or if he heard about Barkley's thing and like what his response is, and that he says he literally doesn't care. So I guess you could thank me for inadvertently starting a beef between JJ Redick and Charles Barkley. But I think like the offensive organization has been better than it was under Darvin. I think he already did some decisions with sticking with the original starting lineup, but then pulling the plug, moving D'Lo to the bench, keeping Austin in, empowering Austin. I think that's been a bet that's paid off. The Max situation has been a bet that's paid off. Even Rui has played, I would say, like better overall compared to last season in the aggregate, but like still there's some parts with him that they're trying to figure out. The only other thing I'll throw in is like the small ball stuff. I think probably needs to go, but outside of that, and I don't think it's going to go. So, that is what it is. But I think he talked about it, and I've talked about this. Like he's talked about you kind of adapt the identity to the team during the course of the season of like what they're doing and how they're growing and how they're evolving. And I think he's done a good job of that. I did not see this defensive ceiling. I did not see this defensive identity even a month ago. And for them to change on the fly and become this like good defensive team, top 5 over the last 11 games. Like, I mean, it's just, it was not something I envisioned. I don't think it was something JJ envisioned, but he's been flexible with that. And I think that really the two big things for me with JJ are the communication skills that he has with that group and maintaining buy-in. And players have talked about, they know their role for the night. They know if they're starting, they know if they're coming off the bench, they know how many minutes they're playing. And that sounds like something small, but just go back to last year and how many guys are upset with that stuff. And like JJ's done a really good job of clear communication, clear standards, making sure people are on the same page. And then 2, I think adapting with lineups, with the rotation, and just with strategy and approach. I think he's been pretty flexible for the most part. Like he has certainly some flaws and certainly some things he's a bit dogmatic with, but for the most part, I think he's been pretty flexible. So I think, I don't know where I'd rank him if I'm ranking him in the league's hierarchy, but I think for a first year coach and with a coach with no prior serious coaching experience, I think he's been solid. Mario Hernandez, does another trade push the Lakers above 50 wins? Depends on the trade. I think, there's always the context of that, but I think the Lakers can win 50 games this year. I think they can win 50 games as currently constructed, but theoretically, if they make the right trade, yes, I would say it pushes them above 50 wins. And then final one from Ben Tucker. Big picture, number 1, we haven't overpaid when everyone wanted to in the summer. Number 2, defense is setting up to possibly be incredible if Vando comes back with one move. I think this is a great place to wrap because you are correct. Big picture, the Lakers did not overpay in their first deal. Now, and I think it sets you up to potentially overpay for your second deal, and it kind of like balances out, but you're not overpaying in 2 deals. But they got really good value in the DFS trade, only gave up 3 seconds, cut money, which I know for fans might not matter, but like it does. I think the books are like that. It just kind of sets you up in a better position. Although ultimately, like that doesn't really matter for the fan experience. But I think that there's some more flexibility there with the financial situation. And then the defense, yeah, I mean, with Vando coming back potentially soon, and I would even throw in Christian Wood. If they make the right move, I think the Lakers are in a really good spot. But it feels like this has been a team that's like, I talked about it last night, like you want to, as you adapt and learn and change your identity, you want to just stack up wins and continue to rack them up during the course of the season. The Lakers are doing that, and it hasn't always been pretty. And there's been some nights where it's not looked great, right? But they continue to win. They continue to figure out ways to win, and I think it's hard not to be optimistic about the direction of this team for the next month going into the trade deadline. And then if they can stay in this at least top 6, but potentially top 4, I think that there has to be some level of pressure on the front office to make a move or another move. And I think there's legitimate reason to make another move because they've shown that they're worth investing in. Remember, we were having this conversation for the past month and a half of, is this group worth investing in? And I think they've shown that they are. And to the front office's credit, they already invested a bit with the DFS trade, but the next move is potentially a bigger one with first round draft capital and really putting the final piece to the puzzle or the final pieces to the puzzle to make this team as good as it can realistically be this season. But with all that said, I'm going to wrap there. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Sunday night after the Lakers play the Houston Rockets in Houston. I am going to that game. I will be in Dallas as well. And also, I mentioned this a bit earlier in the week, but I'm going to be having a home and home with Jason Timpf of Hoops Tonight next week. So Monday, he will be on Buha's block. So be on the lookout for that coming out Monday. And then Wednesday, I will be on Hoops Tonight. So be on the lookout for that coming on Wednesday. So excited to have Jason on to talk about his vision for the team, what he thinks. Like, we're going to have a reaction basically from the Houston game, and then there's the state of the Lakers of at that point in the season of which way they're going and what's the optimal way to handle the next few weeks in terms of the rotation and in terms of lineups and in terms of the trade deadline. So that will be a fun episode on Monday. So be on the lookout for that. But that'll do it for tonight. I'll talk to you all very soon.